I still remember the exact moment when my entire world collapsed. My hands trembled as I stared at the monitor, the blue light illuminating tears I didn't even realize were streaming down my face. 3 months of meticulous data analysis, 2,147 posts cataloged, 16,392 comments parsed, and hundreds of hours triangulating metadata across multiple platforms, all of it culminating in one devastating, irrefutable conclusion. Kevin had never loved me. Not once during our entire 2-year relationship. The timestamp on my final algorithm execution read 3:47 a.m., but time had lost all meaning hours ago. I was literally staring at scientific proof of what my heart had suspected, but my mind refused to accept. Everything I thought we had built together, every memory, every promise, every whispered "I love you" under starlit skies, was mathematically, demonstrably false. The correlation coefficients glowed accusingly on my screen. 0. 97 matched to his performative relationship pattern. 0.13 matched to his genuine affection pattern. Numbers don't lie. And the worst part? I was probably the only person on Earth who could have discovered this truth, because who else would apply advanced pattern recognition algorithms and sentiment analysis frameworks to their ex's social media presence? Who else would spend 12 weeks building custom Python scripts to scrape digital breadcrumbs of deception? But I'm getting ahead of myself. You're probably wondering how a relatively normal 26-year-old software engineer ended up conducting a 3-month digital forensic investigation on her ex-boyfriend's Instagram account. Trust me, I never thought I'd become this person either. It all started 6 months ago, on what should have been our 2-year anniversary. Kevin and I had met at a tech conference in San Francisco. Both of us worked in the industry, me as a back-end developer specializing in data architecture, and him as a UX designer for a competing firm. We connected over our mutual hatred of poorly optimized websites and spent that entire evening talking about everything from quantum computing to our favorite ice cream flavors. By the end of the conference, we were inseparable. For 2 years, I thought we were perfect together. We moved in after 8 months, adopted a rescue cat named Binary, and even started looking at houses in the suburbs. Kevin was everything I'd ever wanted. Attentive, intelligent, and seemingly as in love with me as I was with him. My friends would roll their eyes when I'd gush about how lucky I was. "You two are disgustingly perfect," my best friend Mia would say. I'd just smile and think to myself how right she was, until that anniversary dinner that never happened. I had made reservations at Lumiere, this impossibly exclusive French restaurant downtown that Kevin had been dying to try. I'd spent weeks pulling strings with a client who knew the owner just to get us a table. I bought a new dress, scheduled a hair appointment, and even took the afternoon off work to prepare. At 7:30 p.m., I was sitting at our table, champagne already poured, when my phone buzzed. Something came up at work. "Can't make it tonight. Sorry." That was it. 11 words. No explanation. No offer to reschedule. Just, "Sorry." I called him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted again, asking what happened. No response. By 9:00 p.m., I'd paid for the untouched champagne and an appetizer I couldn't eat, and took an Uber home, my stomach twisted into knots. When I got to our apartment, Kevin wasn't there. Binary greeted me with his usual meow, but the place was dark and empty. I checked Kevin's location on Find My Friends, a feature we'd enabled when we started hiking together for safety, and saw he was at the Jackrabbit, a bar downtown known for its Thursday night mixers for tech professionals. But wait, this story isn't about how I caught him cheating. That would have been simpler, cleaner in a way. What happened was much worse. I stayed up until 2 a.m. when I finally heard his key in the door. He stumbled in, clearly intoxicated, and seemed genuinely surprised to see me sitting on the couch in my fancy dress, makeup smeared from crying. "Babe?" he said, his voice slightly slurred. "What's wrong? Why are you dressed up?" And that's when I felt the first crack in my heart. He had completely forgotten. 2 years together, and he had forgotten the day we met, the day we always celebrated. "It's our anniversary," I said quietly. The look on his face, confusion, followed by realization, followed by what appeared to be genuine remorse, was so convincing that I almost forgave him on the spot. Almost. "I'm so sorry," he said, dropping to his knees in front of me, taking my hands in his. "Work has been insane with this new product launch, and I completely lost track of the date. I'm the worst boyfriend ever. Please forgive me." Here's where I made my first mistake. I believed him. I nodded, accepted his apology, and let him lead me to bed, where he promised to make it up to me the next day with a surprise. The surprise never came. Instead, the next morning, I woke up to an empty bed and a note saying he had to go into the office to catch up on work, on a Saturday. Now, I'm not normally the suspicious type. I've always believed in trusting my partners. After all, without trust, what's the point? But something about this didn't add up. Kevin's company was strict about work-life balance. Weekend work was actively discouraged. And while he claimed the product launch was causing chaos, he hadn't mentioned any issues until that text canceling our dinner. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I checked his social media. That's when I saw it. A post from the Jackrabbits' official Instagram account from the night before. A promotional shot of their Thursday mixer crowd. And there was Kevin, in the background, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. The timestamp on the post, 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes after he texted me that he couldn't make our dinner due to work. My hands were shaking as I zoomed in on the image. The woman was laughing, her head tilted back, long blonde hair cascading down her back. Kevin was looking at her with an expression I recognized all too well. It was how he used to look at me. But this still isn't the story of how I caught him cheating. Because when I confronted him about it that evening, he had an explanation ready. "That's Melissa from the marketing team," he said without hesitation. "We were all there for a team-building event. Didn't I mention that? The whole department went after our emergency meeting about the launch issues. I should have invited you, but I honestly didn't think you'd want to come to a work thing, especially since you were already dressed up for our dinner that I completely messed up." It was so smooth, so plausible. And he showed me his work email with a last-minute calendar invite for the team event. Again, I believed him. I wanted to believe him, but something had shifted. A seed of doubt had been planted, and over the next few weeks, that seed grew into something I couldn't ignore. Little inconsistencies began to stand out. Nights when he was working late, but his location showed he was elsewhere. Text messages he'd quickly hide when I entered the room. A growing emotional distance that he attributed to stress. After a month of this, I finally confronted him again. This time, I had screenshots of his conflicting stories, records of his locations that didn't match his explanations. The evidence wasn't conclusive, but it was enough to demand answers. What I didn't expect was for him to break up with me. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice eerily calm. "The constant suspicion, the checking up on me. You've changed, Emma. The woman I fell in love with trusted me. He made me feel crazy, like I was the problem, like my perfectly reasonable questions based on his suspicious behavior were somehow a betrayal of our relationship." Classic gaslighting, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. He moved out the next day, taking Binary with him because the cat would be better off in a house without all this negative energy. I was too shocked, too devastated to fight him on it. For weeks, I cycled through all the stages of grief, denial. Maybe it was just a rough patch, and he'd come back. Anger. How dare he turn this around on me when he was the one acting suspiciously? Bargaining. If only I'd been more understanding about his work stress, less questioning. Depression. Lying on the floor of my apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done wrong. But acceptance? That never quite came. Because deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The narrative he'd constructed, that I had become irrationally suspicious and driven him away, didn't match the facts. And if there's one thing I'm good at in my professional life, it's analyzing data to find the truth. That's when I made a decision that would consume the next 3 months of my life. If I couldn't trust my instincts or Kevin's words, I would trust data. Cold, hard, objective data. I started with what was publicly available. Kevin's Instagram account. Kevin Designs had over 5,000 followers. Not an influencer by any means, but popular enough in the tech and design circles. He posted regularly, design projects, tech events, personal moments, including, of course, posts about us during our relationship. I created a dedicated workspace in my apartment, converting the small spare bedroom we had once planned to turn into a home office together. I taped timeline charts to the walls, set up a secondary monitor dedicated exclusively to data visualization, and established a rigorous schedule for my investigation. Weeknights from 7 p.m. to midnight, weekends from dawn until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. My friends worried when I declined social invitations, but I told them I was working on a personal project to process the breakup. They had no idea how literal that description was. My initial approach was methodical but basic. I created a spreadsheet to catalog every post he'd made since we met. Date, time, content, location, and who was tagged or featured. I also noted engagement metrics, likes, comments, and the nature of those interactions. I developed a tagging system to categorize posts: professional, personal solo, personal family, personal friends, and relationship, with subcategories for different people. For each post with me, I analyzed positioning, central versus peripheral, physical proximity, facial expressions, and caption sentiment. I assigned numerical values to each parameter and plotted them over time. But I quickly realized this surface-level analysis wouldn't reveal the deeper patterns I was looking for. So I expanded my methodology. I wrote custom scripts to scrape not just his posts, but also the metadata associated with them. I tracked the correlation between post timing and known events in our relationship. I analyzed the language used in his captions with natural language processing tools I adapted from work projects. Yes, I know how this sounds. Believe me, there were moments when I'd step back and think, what am I doing? But then I'd remember how he made me feel when he left. Like I was crazy. Like I had imagined the inconsistencies. Like I had destroyed something beautiful with my paranoia. And I'd go back to my data. As the first month of analysis passed, interesting patterns began to emerge. When I plotted the frequency of posts featuring me against our relationship timeline, there was a clear downward trend starting about 8 months before our breakup. This coincided with several spikes in posts where Melissa from marketing appeared in the background. But this wasn't enough. Correlation doesn't imply causation, as any good data scientist knows. So I dug deeper. I expanded my data set to include his other social media accounts: Twitter for tech sentiment analysis, LinkedIn for professional positioning, even his rarely used Facebook profile for historical relationship patterns. I analyzed cross-platform patterns, timestamps, location data, and tag consistency. I created correlation matrices between posts across platforms, identifying discrepancies in how he portrayed himself and us in different social contexts. I even tracked the subtle shifts in filter usage and composition style. Kevin was meticulous about his visual aesthetic. and deviations could indicate emotional state changes. His Valencia filter period corresponded with major relationship milestones with his ex, while he consistently used Clarendon for posts with me. When he started using Valencia again 8 months before our breakup, it coincided with Melissa's first appearance in his social circle. I developed an algorithm to analyze the linguistic patterns in his captions, tracking sentence structure, emotional tone, word choice, and punctuation habits. I discovered he used more exclamation points with me, average 2.7 per caption, than with Melissa, 1.2, or his previous girlfriend, 1.3. His captions with me averaged 23.4 words, notably longer than with others, 17.2 and 16, 8 respectively. I built word clouds for different relationship periods, watching as excited, awesome, and incredible gave way to busy, project, and work in posts that included me. I ran sentiment analysis across all platforms, plotting emotional trajectories that revealed patterns invisible to the naked eye. 2 months in, my apartment had transformed into something between a data science lab and a detective's investigation board, string connecting photos to timeline points, color-coded sticky notes highlighting pattern anomalies, multiple monitors displaying different visualization frameworks, a dedicated server running continuous analysis on new posts. Yes, I still monitored his accounts, telling myself it was for research integrity. I had accumulated over 200 gigabytes of data and built a comprehensive analytical model that would have impressed my colleagues had they known about it. I'd written over 5,000 lines of custom code, implemented 3 different machine learning algorithms to identify pattern correlations, and developed a proprietary image analysis tool that could detect subtle differences in facial expressions and body language. I'd tracked posting frequency against known calendar events, creating heat maps showing engagement patterns across days of the week and times of day. I'd generated network graphs of his social interactions, watching as certain connections strengthened while others, including mine, weakened over time. But despite this mountain of analysis, I still didn't have the conclusive proof I was looking for. The data suggested patterns, hinted at discrepancies, but nothing definitive. Nothing that couldn't be explained by normal relationship evolution or coincidence. I needed something more, something that would bridge the gap between correlation and causation. I needed raw, unfiltered data that hadn't been curated for public consumption. That's when I remembered something. Kevin and I had once built a small app together, a private photo sharing space just for us. We'd designed it during a weekend hackathon 6 months into our relationship, partly as a fun project, and partly as a solution to his concerns about privacy on mainstream platforms. "I don't want to share our most intimate moments with Silicon Valley algorithms," he'd said. The irony is almost painful now. We'd abandoned it after a few months in favor of just texting photos directly, but the back-end database was still running on one of my development servers, and it contained something invaluable: original, unfiltered versions of photos Kevin had later posted to Instagram, complete with all original metadata. I accessed the forgotten database with a mixture of trepidation and hope. The last backup had run automatically 3 weeks before our breakup. Inside were 347 original photos, most never shared publicly, all with intact EXIF data showing exact timestamps, GPS coordinates, and device information. I wrote a script to compare these raw files with their published versions on Instagram, focusing on photos that appeared in both datasets. The script extracted metadata, analyzed cropping patterns, and identified discrepancies between original capture time and posting time. It also performed basic image comparison to detect subtle edits beyond simple cropping or filter application. Comparing these raw files with their published versions revealed fascinating discrepancies. In several cases, Photos had been taken days or even weeks before they were posted, with captions implying they were happening in the moment. More importantly, many photos of us together had been carefully cropped or angled to minimize my presence. But the real breakthrough came when I examined a series of photos from a weekend trip to Lake Tahoe 3 months before our breakup. We had gone there to celebrate my promotion, staying at a rustic cabin with stunning lake views that Kevin had meticulously researched and booked as a surprise. Just us, the mountains, and champagne, he'd promised. I remembered feeling so loved that weekend, so secure in our relationship despite the small doubts that had begun to surface. In the posted versions on Instagram, Kevin appeared to be enjoying a romantic getaway with me. Sunset photos with captions about making memories with my favorite person, breakfast on the deck with heart emojis and morning views hashtags. But the original files told a different story. In several uncropped images, I could see Melissa's jacket hanging on a chair in the background, her distinctive silver water bottle with the tech conference sticker on the side sitting on the counter, a glimpse of blonde hair at the edge of a frame, all items that had been carefully framed out of the final posts. The XIF data was even more damning. Photos supposedly taken minutes apart showed significant location changes that would have been impossible without driving between spots. The chronology didn't match our actual itinerary, and most devastatingly, several images contained shadow patterns that, when analyzed, clearly indicated a third person's presence, someone deliberately staying out of frame. I went deeper, cross-referencing location data with his credit card statements. We had a joint account for household expenses that I still had access to, and found charges for 3 meals when we supposedly ate at the cabin. The restaurant names matched places Melissa had checked into on her own Instagram that same weekend. I discovered an Airbnb charge for a property larger than the 1-bedroom cabin we supposedly stayed in. I found a receipt for flowers delivered to the cabin on the second day, flowers I had never seen. He had been seeing her for at least 3 months before our breakup, possibly much longer. The evidence was overwhelming now, and explained so many of the work emergencies and late meetings that had increased in frequency during our final months together. But even this wasn't the devastating proof I mentioned at the beginning. This was just confirmation of what I had already suspected, that he had been unfaithful. Painful, yes, but not entirely surprising given the patterns I'd already identified. No. The truly heartbreaking revelation came during the 3rd month of my investigation, when I decided to analyze one final dataset. The subtle differences in how Kevin portrayed me versus how he portrayed Melissa in his posts, and how these patterns compared to his previous relationships that I could access through archived social media. I built a sentiment analysis model specifically calibrated to Kevin's language patterns, analyzing the emotional tone of captions, the composition of photos, the timing of posts. Then I compared posts featuring me from our first 6 months together with recent posts where Melissa appeared. The results were undeniable, statistically significant, and devastating. The patterns I identified in how Kevin portrayed Melissa matched exactly how he had portrayed his previous girlfriend before me. The girlfriend he had told me he never really loved, but stayed with for appearances. In other words, the data proved that Kevin had a distinct pattern in how he portrayed women he genuinely cared for versus women he was with for convenience or appearance. And according to those patterns, he had never, not once, been truly in love with me. Every loving caption, every seemingly spontaneous photo, every public declaration of affection, all of it followed his relationship for show pattern rather than his genuinely in love pattern. For 2 years, I had been living in a relationship that, from his perspective, was essentially performative. You might be wondering how I could possibly determine something as subjective as love through data analysis. But the patterns were clear. With women he truly cared for, Kevin posted less frequently but more authentically, used fewer filters, wrote shorter and more personal captions, and positioned them differently in photos. With me, he followed his relationship for appearance template precisely. High frequency of posts during milestone moments, carefully curated filters, lengthy captions that read well but said little, and compositions that subtly positioned me as an accessory rather than a partner. When I saw the final visualizations of my analysis, I broke down completely. It wasn't just that he had cheated or lied. It was that everything I thought we had was statistically, provably false. For 2 years, I had been in love with someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient placeholder, a socially acceptable relationship to maintain until something better came along. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by data visualizations and statistical analyses that proved beyond any reasonable doubt that the relationship I had cherished was a lie. It was, without question, the lowest moment of my life. But then something unexpected happened. As I stared at the evidence of Kevin's deception, I began to see patterns in my own behavior as well. The way I had overlooked red flags, how I had diminished myself to fit his narrative, how I had allowed him to gaslight me when I questioned inconsistencies. The data didn't just tell me about Kevin. It revealed truths about myself that I had been unwilling to see. And that's when my investigative project transformed into something else entirely, a journey of self-discovery and healing. I spent the next week reorganizing my data, this time focusing on my own patterns. I analyzed the changes in my social media presence, my communication with friends and family, and even my work performance throughout our relationship. The picture that emerged was troubling but enlightening. I had gradually subsumed my identity into his, becoming less authentic and more performative myself. But here's the thing about good data analysis. Once you identify a pattern, you can work to change it. I decided to do one final thing with all my research. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report, clean, professional, meticulously documented. I included visualizations, statistical analyses, and clear explanations of my methodology. Then I sent it to Kevin with a simple subject line: what the data reveals. 3 days later, I received a response that consisted of just 2 words: "You're insane." No denial of the findings, no explanation for the patterns, just an attempt to dismiss the entire analysis by questioning my mental state. Classic deflection. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because by then, I had already begun the process of reclaiming myself. I deleted all my research except for a single summary document that I stored away, not as ammunition against Kevin, but as a reminder to myself of the patterns to watch for in future relationships. I redecorated my apartment, removing all traces of our life together. I reconnected with friends I had neglected. I threw myself into new work projects that excited me. And perhaps most importantly, I started being honest about the relationship when people asked. Not in a bitter, vengeful way, but in a straightforward, data-informed way. We wanted different things. The data suggested we weren't compatible. It's been 6 months since I completed my investigation, and I won't pretend it was a healthy coping mechanism or that I recommend others follow my example. The hundreds of hours I spent analyzing Kevin's social media presence were, in many ways, hundreds of hours I could have spent healing and moving forward. But I also can't deny that the process gave me something valuable: certainty. Not the romantic certainty I had craved from Kevin, but the intellectual certainty that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right, and that the gaslighting I experienced was real. Last week, I ran into Kevin and Melissa at a tech networking event. They looked happy together, and for a moment, I felt that old pain resurface. But then I remembered what my data had shown me, that the patterns in how he portrays their relationship match exactly how he portrayed his relationship with the girlfriend he genuinely loved before me. And I felt something unexpected: relief. Relief that I was no longer living in a beautifully constructed lie. Relief that I had trusted my instincts enough to seek the truth. Relief that I had found the strength to confront that truth, no matter how painful. As I watched them from across the room, Melissa caught my eye and gave me a small, uncertain smile. I smiled back, genuinely, because my data had revealed something else. There was a high probability that she had no idea about his patterns, just as I hadn't. And there was a strong correlation between Kevin's genuine love relationships and eventual heartbreak. I decided in that moment not to warn her, not out of spite, but because I realized that my journey, as unconventional and possibly unhealthy as it had been, was mine alone. She would have to discover her own truth in her own way. Instead, I walked over, introduced myself politely, and engaged in brief, pleasant conversation before excusing myself to chat with colleagues. Kevin looked confused and slightly alarmed the entire time, clearly expecting a scene that never came. Because that's the thing about discovering the truth through data. It doesn't just reveal facts, it empowers you. When you can see the patterns clearly, they lose their hold over you. The uncertainty, the self-doubt, the what-ifs that keep you awake at night, they all dissolve in the face of clear, objective evidence. As I left the event that night, I realized that my 3-month investigation had given me something far more valuable than confirmation that Kevin never loved me. It had given me back myself, a stronger, wiser, more data-literate version who would never again ignore the evidence in front of her, no matter how painful it might be to acknowledge. And that, I decided, was worth every minute of those 3 months. Today, I'm dating again. Cautiously, mindfully, with a healthy awareness of relationship patterns, but without analyzing every interaction to death. I've found that authentic connections don't require spreadsheets or sentiment analysis to validate. They simply feel right, consistently, in a way that can't be faked or performed. Sometimes I wonder if Kevin ever read my full report, if he ever confronted the patterns I identified so meticulously. But I've learned that some data sets aren't worth analyzing. His growth, his realizations, his future patterns, those are variables outside my model now. Instead, I focus on my own data points, moments of genuine joy, authentic connections, professional achievements, personal growth. I've built a new predictive model, one that doesn't try to quantify someone else's feelings for me, but rather helps me recognize when I'm being true to myself. Because that's the most important lesson my investigation taught me. The most valuable pattern to recognize is your own worth, and no amount of external validation or data analysis can substitute for that fundamental truth. So if you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you're questioning a relationship, doubting your instincts, or feeling gaslighted by someone you love, remember that you don't need 3 months of data analysis to validate your concerns. Your instincts are a sophisticated pattern recognition system built on countless subtle observations. Trust them, and know that whatever you discover, however painful it might be, the truth will ultimately set you free to write a new algorithm for your life, one based on authenticity, self-respect, and genuine connection. After all, that's the only pattern worth optimizing for.